Okay, so you're busy. You want to know what's happening around the world, right? The stuff that
Yeah.
actually matters. We've sifted through a whole stack of reports, and we're bringing you uh, the key stuff, the important things that are happening globally. Today, we're diving into, well, a near miss in the U.S. financial system. Then we'll take a look at inflation trends. Then the Russia-Ukraine conflict, of course, still ongoing. And then something a little bit different, an AI-generated video out of China. So we're kind of looking at all these different areas to try and get a sense of what's happening in the world today.
Yeah, and all of this is coming from sources like The Economist, we've got Yahoo Finance, we've got The Telegraph, and LBC News as well. So we're really trying to, give you a good understanding of all these developments and what they mean.
Hmm.
And hopefully offer you a little bit more clarity so you can see why they're important without getting bogged down in all the details.
Okay, so let's jump right in. And this first one is, well, a little unsettling. The Economist ran an article today, April 10th, 2025, called America's Financial System Came Close to the Brink. And it's really to sound like something out of a movie. What exactly were they reporting?
Well, the article really focuses on how turbulent the financial markets were in early April and how this caused some serious concern about just how stable major financial institutions really are. You've got stocks and bonds and all sorts of assets fluctuating rapidly. And a lot of people started wondering if some of the big players in the U.S. financial system could really withstand, all that volatility.
Yeah, it's kind of unnerving to think about it. The Economist goes on to explain that all this market instability actually sparked fears that some of the largest banks and investment firms, uh, they didn't have enough of a buffer to really handle all the ups and downs. But then things get interesting because they highlight the actions the Federal Reserve and the government took. They didn't just sit back and wait for things to recover. They actively intervened and really prevented what could have been a much bigger crisis.
Right. And the article specifically mentions things like the discount window. That's where banks can borrow from the Fed. And it also hints at some other things that might have been done to inject liquidity into the system and get the markets to stabilize.
Hmm.
If we step back and look at the big picture, I think it's a good reminder that even when financial systems seem strong, they can still have weaknesses, vulnerabilities that make them susceptible to this kind of pressure. So even if a crisis is averted, these events can show us where the cracks are and what we need to pay closer attention to going forward.
So for anyone listening, you might be thinking, why does this even matter to me? Well, understanding that these vulnerabilities exist is really important. I mean, it reminds us that the global financial system isn't always as secure as it seems. And when there's pressure like this, it can have some pretty big consequences for the entire economy.
Hmm.
Think about things like borrowing costs or the value of investments. That can affect everyone.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting to consider here are the specific types of vulnerabilities that came into play. Were they in certain sectors? Were they tied to particular financial instruments? The Economist probably touches on some of those details, and understanding those details could give us a much better grasp of the risks involved. And it also makes you think about, okay, what can we do differently? What kind of regulations could we put in place? Or are there things the industry can change in their practices to make the system stronger and more resilient in the future?
So we went from uh, almost a financial meltdown to maybe some good news on the economic front. Yahoo Finance has an article out today titled Inflation Falls in March as Annual Core Consumer Prices Rise at Slowest Rate in 4 Years. So we're getting a look at some positive trends in inflation. What would you say is the main point here?
The thing to really focus on here is core consumer prices. That means they're not including the prices of food and energy because those tend to jump around a lot and they're affected by seasonal things or geopolitical events. So when you look at core inflation, you're basically looking at the prices of other goods and services to see how fast they're increasing. And this gives economists a better idea of, the underlying inflationary pressures in the economy, the ones that are more persistent. And the fact that this core rate rose at its slowest annual pace in 4 years as of March 2025, that really suggests that those pressures are starting to ease up.
And this isn't just some abstract economic term, right? I mean, this slowdown in the growth of core prices could actually affect your everyday life. It basically means the things you buy, a lot of the goods and services aren't getting more expensive as quickly as they were. And that means over time, you'll have a little more spending power, maybe a bit more room to breathe in your budget.
Yeah, exactly. And I bet the Yahoo Finance article probably emphasizes that economic analysts are watching this very closely to see if this slowdown is going to last. They'll be looking at all sorts of economic indicators to figure out if this is really a turning point in the fight against inflation. And This is a really tricky time for the Federal Reserve because they have to use monetary policy, all those tools, to manage the money supply and credit conditions to try and keep inflation under control. But they also don't want to accidentally trigger an economic downturn. So it's a tough balancing act.
Yeah, it is. So from teetering on the edge of a financial crisis to potentially easing inflation, it's quite a mix. But now let's shift gears and look at what's happening internationally, because the conflict in Ukraine is still a major global issue. The Telegraph has a report out today titled Russia-Ukraine, Zelensky, Putin, and the war's latest developments. So it looks like they're bringing us up to speed on what's happening. What are some of the key points they're highlighting?
The Telegraph's report really underscores that this conflict has been going on for over a year now, and it's still a very fluid and complex situation. I imagine the article probably goes into detail about the latest diplomatic negotiations and what's happening with the military operations on the ground. And it probably also covers how different countries and international organizations are responding to the conflict, whether it's through aid or sanctions or other measures.
Yeah, and the title specifically mentions Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin. So I'm guessing they're focusing on, the actions and the goals of these two leaders. It's a reminder that this isn't a static conflict. Both sides are actively working towards their objectives, and the decisions made at the top have a huge impact on how the war unfolds.
Absolutely. And if we think about the broader picture, this conflict has some really serious geopolitical and humanitarian consequences. It's changed alliances. It's caused major disruptions in global energy and food markets. And of course, most tragically, it's resulted in a tremendous amount of human suffering and displacement. So understanding the nuances of what's happening is really crucial if we want to grasp how international relations are changing and what kind of challenges the world is facing.
And it's clear that this isn't just a regional conflict, right? I mean, it has a ripple effect across the globe. The way the world responds, or sometimes doesn't respond, has a huge impact on how we understand international politics today.
Yeah, and it raises a lot of questions about what the long-term consequences will be. How will this conflict ultimately reshape the political map of Europe? What kind of lasting impact will it have on international law or the concept of national sovereignty? These are big questions that will probably continue to shape global affairs for years to come.
Definitely makes you think. Now, for something totally different and a real sign of the times, LBC News is reporting on this viral video out of China. It's an AI-generated video that pokes fun at former U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs. It's kind of a fascinating example of how technology is becoming part of international commentary. What can you tell us about this video?
Well, I think what's really interesting here is how artificial intelligence is being used to create and spread political commentary that crosses borders. This video, it looks like it started gaining traction in early April 2025, and it uses AI to basically create a satire of Trump's trade policies. I imagine the humor probably comes from how it portrays the impact of those tariffs on American businesses and consumers, maybe using some exaggerated scenarios or witty dialogue.
So from what LBC News is saying, it sounds like the video's using humor to make a point about those tariffs. And it's pretty amazing to think that AI can now create this kind of political satire. And it looks like it sparked a lot of discussion. Some people see it as a clever new way to make a point, while others see it as a form of political messaging or even as an attempt to influence people's opinions.
Yeah, and I think those different reactions really highlight how new and potentially impactful this kind of AI-generated content is. On the one hand, it's like digital satire that can reach people all over the world very quickly. But on the other hand, it raises concerns about whether these technologies could be used to spread misinformation or, make international tensions even worse.
For sure. It really underscores how powerful AI is becoming in content creation and how it could play a big role in shaping public discourse on a global level. It's a pretty interesting glimpse into the future, how technology and international relations are getting more and more intertwined in ways we probably couldn't have imagined just a few years ago.
It really does make you wonder about the future of digital communication and how AI might influence how we perceive things and what kinds of stories get told on an international stage. As AI gets more sophisticated, we might see more and more of this type of content, and it will be really important to think critically about where it's coming from and what its potential impact could be.
So today we've taken a deep dive into, well, almost a crisis in the U.S. financial system. Some potentially positive signs when it comes to inflation, the ongoing complexities of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and this really interesting example of AI being used for international political commentary. It's quite a mix of important global issues.
Yeah, and we hope this overview has been insightful and given you a better understanding of these events and their significance without, throwing too much information at you.
Definitely. And as you think about all these different topics, think about what might be connecting them. We've got economic vulnerabilities, geopolitical tensions, the rise of AI-driven content. All these things might seem separate, but they're all happening within this complex and interconnected global system. So what kind of subtle but important links might there be between them? I think that's something worth pondering. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.